When neighbors hadn't heard from or seen the family next door for 3 days, they suspected something was wrong. Concerned, they called the police. Before the authorities arrived, the neighbors opened the door and found a 3-year-old girl cradling her 2-month-old brother. In a soft voice, she said, "My mommy and daddy died." This is a heartbreaking story. They say childhood is the most beautiful season of life, but for David Parsa, it was a phase he longed to escape. Growing up, he never experienced the warmth of a happy family. He didn't know what it felt like to be loved by either a father or a mother. He often questioned why his parents were so different from those of his classmates. Why didn't they ever go out together? Why did they act like strangers? David's 6th birthday was one of the most joyful moments of his childhood. But it was also the day he realized something was wrong. For the first time, his family gathered together in the sitting room. His mom sang him a birthday song, while his dad, who struggled with borderline personality disorder, sat motionless, staring blankly. Yet David didn't mind. He was simply happy his dad was there. Just as he was about to blow out the candles, filled with excitement, his dad suddenly stood up and shouted at him to stop. Even though David had lost count of the times his dad screamed at him, it still made him shiver every time. Suddenly, his dad picked up the cake and smashed it against the wall. Birthdays shouldn't be celebrated. What's so beautiful about life? Why are you smiling? His dad screamed. Immediately after his dad's outburst, David's mom, Lauren, quickly grabbed his hand and led him to his room. She turned off the lights and closed the blinds. "Whatever happens, don't come out. Just stay here," she said. But before she could say more, there was a heavy knock on the door. David heard his dad's voice. "Where are you?" "Come out here, Lauren." His mom ran out, and then David heard his parents arguing. Objects were being thrown around. The TV, chairs, and picture frames. David also heard his mom screaming and crying. This went on for about 20 minutes before the house fell eerily silent. Later that evening, David finally came out of his room and saw his dad sobbing in a corner. He wanted to ask where his mom was, but he was too afraid his dad would yell at him. They never had a conversation without his dad screaming, followed by crying. That night, David went to bed early, but around 8 p.m., someone snuck into his room and woke him up. It was his mom's elder sister. She grabbed his hand and they fled the house. "What about Dad? We can't leave him like that. Where's Mom?" The little boy cried, but his aunt didn't answer. For the next 5 years, David lived with his aunt, where he was subjected to various forms of mistreatment. He never heard from his parents again and lived in a very lonely, sad world. During his time at his aunt's house, David met a girl named Cynthia, and they became best friends. "I'll always be your friend and I'll never leave your side," Cynthia told David one morning after his classmates had bullied him at school. David was 11 when his mom suddenly showed up one morning at his aunt's doorstep. David had always believed ghosts only existed in books, but for a moment, he was convinced his mom was one. How could she suddenly reappear after abandoning him for years? There was so much David wanted to ask her, why she left, where she had been, but no words came out. All this time, he couldn't go a day without thinking of her, yet here she was, and he couldn't even hold her. She couldn't hug him either. That evening, they returned to the family home, and David was surprised to see his dad still there. A caretaker was looking after him, but his dad had lost a lot of weight and looked very ill. The home was peaceful for the first week, but then the fight started again. 6 months later, David's mom rushed into his room and said, "I can't take it anymore. I'm going to run away again. I'm sorry I left you the first time. Please pack your bags and let's go. Your dad will hurt us if we stay." But David couldn't leave his dad behind, so he told his mom, "Go," and she left without looking back. That was the last time he ever saw her. From that point on, David had to fend for himself. He worked several menial jobs, and with Cynthia by his side, he kept pushing through life. Years later, David graduated from college and proposed to Cynthia. She accepted, but to his surprise, she returned the ring a week later, saying her parents didn't approve of the marriage. This shattered David. He stopped fighting and became a shadow of his former self. He felt he had no reason to live. He distanced himself from relationships and lived a lonely life. Eventually, David's father was taken into a retirement home, but David never visited him. He resented his dad and blamed him for separating him from his mom. When David turned 40, he gave in to the idea of marriage after enduring so much pressure and single shaming. He met Mihoko, 34, and they got married. Despite knowing David was battling depression, Mihoko loved him. She thought she could help him heal, but she was wrong. She didn't know much about his traumatic childhood and repressed feelings because David rarely spoke about them. From the wedding night onward, they faced troubles. David would break down and tell Mihoko, "Go away, you'll never take Cynthia's place." Yet sometimes, David was in a good mood, and Mihoko cherished those moments. He would cook for her, read to her, and even comb her hair. But soon after, he would lock himself away and talk to himself. Deep down, Mihoko knew David had a kind soul, but life had dealt him a blow too harsh to handle. She even tried getting David to take medication, but it only made things worse, leading him to treat her poorly. Later, Mihoko thought having children might improve David's condition, so they had their first child, Adriana. Sadly, things only got worse. David saw himself as a weak father and distanced himself from his daughter, as their relationship reminded him of the broken one he had with his own father. As time passed, David lost his job, leaving Mihoko to bear the financial burden. Despite this, she continued to love him and their child. When David's mood soured, he would scream at Mihoko, telling her she was a bad influence on their daughter. "When you get tired of this, are you just going to run away like my mom? Don't you see you'll never make your child happy?" Despite the turmoil, Mihoko raised Adriana with love, teaching her about the importance of love and forgiveness. Fortunately, little Adriana understood these lessons. 3 years later, they had a second child, a boy named Simeon. After his birth, David's condition worsened. Simeon resembled David's father, and David feared he was raising another version of him. Mihoko continued to encourage David to seek help, but he insisted she was the one with mental health issues. Tragedy struck when Simeon was only 2 months old. One morning, David took his wife's life in their bedroom, then ended his own. For 3 days, Adriana took care of her little brother, feeding him baby food and finding some food in the fridge for herself. Concerned neighbors, noticing they hadn't seen the family, knocked on the door. When no one responded, they called the locksmith to open it. Inside, they found Adriana holding her brother and saying, "My mom and dad died." One neighbor immediately alerted the police, while others bathed the children and gave them food. Adriana and her brother were later placed in the care of child welfare officers and eventually adopted by their mother's relatives. It's heartbreaking that these children had to endure such tragedy, but it's heartwarming to know that Mihoko instilled in her daughter the values of love and forgiveness. Seeing how Adriana cared for her brother, it's clear they have a bright future ahead, despite the hardships caused by their parents' troubled relationship. It's beautiful to see something so pure and strong emerge from such a painful situation. Adriana and her brother are inseparable. Their bond is beyond words, her relative said. I'm really keen to know your thoughts on this story, so please don't hesitate to share your insights in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it engaging, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more similar content. Feel free to share this video. Take good care of yourselves, and I'm excited to connect with you in our future videos.